Hello, and welcome to my presentation, Becoming World, Reimagining the Material Self. Just a bit of context before we begin. I'm currently completing my second year in a program called Interdisciplinary Humanities at Brock University in St. Catharines, Canada. And today I'll be sharing my research creation project with you. These are early days in the life of my project, which means I'm very open to suggestions, interpretations, or references of any kind. So I have a colorful slideshow for you today, which I've divided into two sections. I have a bird's eye view wherein I'll discuss the broad strokes of my research creation project, and a worm's eye view, where I'll be teasing out some of the ideas I'm eager to develop or currently wrestling with, including hypersensitivity and intuitive or magical thinking. Okay, so my research is powered by the materiality of the body and its entanglement with the physical world. My aim is to execute a research creation project that draws on the artistic practice I established during my time as an MFA student, specifically my ongoing body of work titled Imprint. So through performance-based video, Imprint addresses the relationship between two landscapes, one outside the self and the other within. Using the body as a conduit and a canvas, the project considers the intrinsic nature of this dynamic by imprinting the landscape upon human skin. I'll now just play a quick edit of some raw footage from a 2018 installment of Imprint. This will hopefully give you a sense of where I'm coming from, but there's no sound here, just visuals. Okay. So this interplay of interior and exterior is one of the elements from Imprint that I've carried over to my PhD research. My work understands the skin as a physical membrane that sheds and reconstitutes itself continually. Thus, the flesh is never the same material, but always a contour in process, a permeable, shifting physical parameter. In other words, we let the world in whether we want to or not. Now, I plan to address this vulnerability through Stacy Alaimo's concept of transcorporeality, which emphasizes the human body as a site across which substances and forces are constantly crossing, and by which human beings are inseparable from the environment, both natural and man-made. So this means that we're both physically vulnerable, but also responsible to other beings. Now, as the concept of transcorporeality relates specifically to nature and the environment, it encourages us to reimagine questions of environmental ethics and practices as deeply personal. So what is safe? What is not safe? And how do we know? This kind of thinking changes how we move around in the world. So we begin to think through the fact that there are myriad harmful and invisible substances that we come into contact with, such as manufactured chemicals, these kinds of substances that are alien to life itself. Transcorporeality reveals that the environment and our material selves are bound up with one another in a deeply intimate manner and encourages a reconsideration of ourselves as complicated, messy, and tangled material beings. Now, my research will mine transcorporeal evocations across the arts, seeking the ways in which the world takes up residence in the body. An example I love to draw on here is a reflection by modern dancer Martha Graham, who during World War II observed how daily newspaper headlines affected the muscles in the bodies of her dancers. Now, not all transcorporeal exchanges are troubling. Pleasure, too, can spiral through these material encounters. Let's see, Wendell Berry's notion of extensive pleasure, for example, in which aesthetics, pleasure, and politics come together in the practice of savoring food that's made more delectable with the accurate consciousness of the lives and the world from which the food comes. Envisioning the world as an enchanted living place full of surprising pleasures can foster connection, interrelation, and intersubjectivity. Another example we could consider in the vein of pleasurable transactions is the process of hormesis, which occurs when a cell or an organism exhibits a beneficial reaction to the exposure of increasing amounts of a substance or condition. So low exposures to toxins and other stressors. Examples might include radiation. So microdoses of radiation are used to cure some forms of cancer. Now, as I've mentioned, my work embraces a research creation method, which will combine creative practice with qualitative research techniques, including phenomenological study and visual ethnography. Now, at this time, the creative component remains pretty nebulous in form, but so far I know that I envision a multi-channel audio-visual installation. The installation will consist of 6 videos, each video devoted to a participant with whom I'll work over the course of roughly 2 years. Now, 6 may be overly ambitious, but I like this number because it reflects the molecular structure of carbon, which is composed of a hexagonal shape, and carbon, of course, is essential for all known living systems. So the videos, they'll be sort of diaristic in nature. They'll document conversations and explorations of the participants' personal bodily experiences in and of the physical world. And the narrative that emerges from these explorations will be interpreted collaboratively by the participant and myself into a storied performance, a dance of sorts. I imagine this dance as sort of underpinning the video, like a current from which the overarching video will draw its energy. So I believe that what we know and how we learn is shaped and enabled by our bodies. I agree with Merleau-Ponty, who maintained that the mind is neither separate from the body nor capable of ordering the body and its perceptions, but rather the body both thinks and perceives, and the perceiving mind is an incarnated mind. The body is a cognitive medium of thinking as well as a sensory medium of emotion and lived experience. Feminist theorist Elizabeth Gross extended this idea further and proposed that not only are the mind and the body connected, but that the body has all the explanatory power of minds. In other words, the body can know the world. It can create knowledge from lived experience. Now, I'll circle back to these ideas shortly when I discuss hypersensitivity. But for now, I don't have any visuals as I'm still very early in the pre-production stages, but I do have references I can share, the spirit of which I hope in some ways to capture in my own work. So some of you may be familiar with Henri Rousseau's paintings of individuals wandering through forests alone. Althusser sees these figures as individuals without encounters, but I see them as conversing with the natural world, tentatively navigating more than human others, perhaps even coming to realize that the other is inextricably a constituent of themselves, integral and necessary to the human being. Anyways, I like these images as a starting point for visualizing the project to come. Now, the creation of this dance performance that I previously spoke about will be choreographed specifically for the camera and will involve individuals who are sensitive to the world through their bodies, hypersensitive to the world. But when I'm really interested in exploring the ways that these sensitivities might be reconceived as strengths or as assets. So some of you might be familiar with Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. The protagonist in this book has a condition called hyperempathy, which makes her acutely aware of the pain and pleasure felt by other characters. Now, in the book, hyperempathy is considered a liability or a disability, yet Butler implies that hyperempathy could also be conceived of as a positive trait, an antidote to the violence and destruction that seems to define our species. And so the performances I hope to co-produce are not merely a means to register discord between bodies and the environment, but also to seek to ameliorate or harmonize it. Now, this discussion segues nicely into the second half of my presentation. I'd like to now telescope in on this idea of sensitive bodies, after which I'll talk briefly about the role of intuitive thinking in my work. So I'm very interested in hypersensitive individuals and narratives of hypersensitivity as implications of a more vital consternation concerning the sustainability of Western liberal humanism and its autonomous, self-contained human figure. I really like the idea of reframing the hypersensitive body as a highly calibrated instrument of perception, a thin-skinned, exceedingly responsive, perhaps overly or hyperhuman. By way of example, those who suffer from environmental illness could be considered clairvoyants, possessing a supernatural awareness. Bodies which constitute very finely tuned instruments, which can measure potentially toxic chemicals at very low levels. Hypersensitivity is understood to possess an intimate, often occult and untransferable knowledge to which others do not have access. Now, this knowledge might be perceived as a warning that the environmentally ill offer to those who do not sense the danger. So we might then liken the hypersensitive body to a canary in a coal mine. Now, powers of intuition are definitely at play here. And this brings me to my next point. Intuitive or magical thinking. So intuition is the natural ability to understand or perceive something immediately without consciously using reason, analysis, or interference. And thus, intuition is often relegated to the status of the subjective, and its contribution in the process of how we come to understand and know the world and ourselves is suppressed. So it's often aligned with the emotional and sensual experiences of the body rather than the mind. Now, my research endeavors to achieve equilibrium between intellect and intuition, as both are necessary for developing new integrative approaches. I believe, as Bertrand Russell does, that the union of the intuitive and the empirical is our most promising conduit to truth. For intuitive thinking offers a powerful complement to the scientific lens on reality. Now, science deals in certainty, whereas uncertainty is the currency of magic. Considering the unprecedented times we're living through, and the fact that our research should strive to both reflect and shape the world we live in, it seems to me that in order to understand and honor this planet we call home, intuitive or magical thinking is urgently necessary. As writers, we cast spells through language, weaving words together to bring the contours of our world to light. If we follow Deleuze and Guattari and imagine ourselves as sorcerers, it may empower us to craft work that has the potential to enact real change and give rise to new configurations. So recent findings in cognitive psychology reveal that the same synapses of the brain fire, whether you're remembering something that's taken place in your own experience, recalling a scene that you once read in a book or saw in a film, or dreaming up an event that's never taken place. This is a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci rejecting the classical and medieval models of the faculties, which allotted different sections of the brain to intellect and fantasy. He was highly original in refusing to separate the mental processes of reason and imagination. Now, in relation to arts, this research is especially significant because this new understanding of consciousness confirms a defining dynamic of creativity itself, that the combinatory imagination at work does not engage separate faculties, but demands similar activities from the brain. So when making artwork, memories, empirical observations, and make-believe continually overlap and interact. This is just more footage here from Imprint that I'm going to let play just for a little bit while I wrap up my presentation. So it seems to me that this intersection of intellect and intuition, or research and creation, is fundamental for the future of scholarly investigation. In times of uncertainty, panic, and grief, and we are grieving, according to Slavoj Žižek, over the state of economic, social, and ecological demise. But it's in these times that we turn to art for the sake of pleasure and relief, yes, but also as a source of meaning and for guidance. Art can recalibrate relationships in and through materialities, across spaces and places, with humans and non-humans, and help us forge strategies for living with others in the yet to come. So in conclusion, my research comes from a deep paying attention to the elements of the living world, and I feel a great responsibility to share those stories in an effort to help people fall in love with the world again. So this brings my presentation full circle as we arrive at the end, which is also the beginning, my title, Becoming World. This phrase is borrowed from a text which is very dear to me, Rainer Maria Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, wherein he writes that love is a high inducement to the individual to ripen, to become something in himself, to become world, for himself, for another's sake. It is a great exacting claim upon him, something that chooses him out and calls him to vast things. And this is where I'd like to end, on the possibility of a restored love that wields maybe the magic power to recuperate, if only partially, our world. And on the consideration of my own responsibility as a budding academic, hopefully a future scholar, to cast the spells necessary for a possible future. Okay, I just have I have a couple of questions here that I've been grappling with that I thought I would present in the hope that they might generate some discussion for our forthcoming conversation. So I'll let you think about those, and I just want to thank you for attending my presentation, and I look forward to our conversation.